check.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very cool.
Hello, hello. Just making sure we're recording for everybody's benefit. Are we good? Thank you. Hi, good evening. Welcome again. I'm Judith Mowry. I work at the Office of Equity and Human Rights, and I'm here to just help support the process by facilitating some of the meetings. We're glad you're here. As I said before everyone came in, we don't have a written agenda tonight, but the agenda is that Nicole Grant from the mayor's office is going to update everybody on where we are in the process of recruiting the new PSEP. And then we're going to have time for questions and answers. I'm going to ask you to kind of try to wait until she's presented everything to ask your questions. And I think we're going to have plenty of time for the questions. So, and again, there are cookies in the back. There's coffee that's been promised, but not yet. And but once it comes in, please help yourselves. And so Nicole Grant from the mayor's office is going to take it from here.
I've been told to stand behind the table so that the light's on my face. It's a little awkward. My preference is to move around and kind of be with you all, but I will follow instructions here. And yeah, I'm basically the agenda. That's why there's no agenda. It's just me. Usually we have multiple presentations by multiple city staff, but as the kind of senior policy advisor in the mayor's office, essentially kind of working on the PSEP, I'm really just here to present you all with like a full update, in addition to pending changes to the PSEP plan, which are going before council next Wednesday. So I'm going to explain those changes as well at the very end. And if you have any questions, of course, let me know. But I'm asking that you all kind of hold off until I've gone through all of this information. So first, thank you very much for being here. We are really excited kind of about the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing. I actually just came from the youth interviews at the PSEP office, and so this is fully underway, and we're honestly thrilled by the candidates that we have. So I just want to give you all general history of what we've been doing and also run through the selection process, which involves the Selection Advisory Committee. So the PSEP facilitators, so that's Training for Transformation, and the Brad Taylor Group began work on May 10th. They've met with the mayor. They have been on Think Out Loud. They have conducted substantial outreach using a trauma-informed approach. So they've prioritized people with lived experiences, either as members of marginalized communities, people who have mental health conditions, youth, the houseless community, the LGBTQ community, immigrants and refugees, et cetera. And so the focus has been on finding, or focus was on finding, quality applicants rather than soliciting a large pool of candidates. So they took the time to walk people through applications, for example, and let me know if I need to slow down. In addition to suggesting to us, the city, in the future, different means of submitting applications. And so next year, for example, we're looking at the possibility of video applications for anyone whose forte is not a written application. We just want to make it as accessible to everyone as possible. So at the end of the day, by the deadline, we received over 100 applications from Portlanders, which far exceeded our expectations. We were so thrilled. It really has been a leap of faith, I think, for the city of Portland. And I don't mean the city of Portland, the institution, but you all, essentially, to kind of participate and engage in this way. So from application receipt. Applications were assessed by the Selection Advisory Committee. It's a committee of 5 community members, each chosen by a commissioner. I want to make it clear, the mayor's office was not involved in any part of the Selection Advisory Committee's selection process. So discussions around who to interview and final recommendations to the mayor were the sole responsibility of the Selection Advisory Committee. The mayor didn't know, I didn't know, the chief of staff didn't know. It was there was a clear firewall, and that was very intentional on our part. Prior to assessing the applications, the Selection Advisory Committee agreed upon a scoring method that allowed them as a group to weigh different areas of focus in determining which individuals would be the best candidates for membership. So they focused on the following areas that were also weighted accordingly. Lived experience as a member of a marginalized community, 25%. Lived experience with mental or physical health issues, 25%. Interpersonal skills, 15%. Experience working within or advocating for marginalized communities, 15%. Experience utilizing social services and engaging in government processes, 15%. So SAC members scored the above areas on a scale of 1 to 4, and then each area was weighted based on the percentages that I just laid out. SAC members were also encouraged to put forth any candidates for consideration, regardless of how they scored, and then share their thoughts with the other members of the SAC on why they believe that candidate should be considered. And so there are actually several candidates who, from what I understand, were offered for discussion in that way, and there was robust dialogue around their kind of candidacies. So each SAC member had a top 25 list. 46 individuals represented on one or more of each SAC member's list. So after deliberation, the list of 46 was narrowed to about 22 using a consensus model. So those 22 individuals were ultimately interviewed by the Selection Advisory Committee using a scoring guide. And each member of the Selection Advisory Committee scored each candidate on a scale of 1 to 10 based on their interview and application. The Selection Advisory Committee then provided recommendations to the mayor, listing the 11 candidates they believed should be on the PSEP, the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, and the 3 candidates who should be alternates. Our office, the mayor's office, consulted with all commissioner offices before the mayoral interviews and solicited their feedback along the way regarding different candidates. So to date, the mayor has completed all of the adult interviews. Each interview was 15 minutes in length, and we've completed all but 1, possibly 2, youth interviews, which will be tomorrow. The mayor met with 17 adults total. So if you're doing the math, the Selection Advisory Committee recommended 14 specifically. That's a really small number, especially given that we received over 100 applications. So the mayor asked to meet with a few more candidates just to really get a full sense of who was in the pool. We wanted like a fuller perspective. We wanted to hear from as many Portlanders as possible. I was in those interviews. And so he met with 17 adults total and 6 high school aged youth. And each interview was attended by myself, like I said, the mayor, Jared Hager from the U.S. Attorney's Office, one of the facilitators. So for the adult interview, Hoon Tang from Training for Transformation, and for the youth interviews, Brandon Dixon from Training for Transformation, and a member of the Selection Advisory Committee. So the goal is to deliberate on the candidates next week and have decisions made within 2 weeks, and that'll be like a press release or some sort of like social media generally announcement, followed by council confirmation, ideally in mid to late September. So that's it as far as the process is concerned. Unfortunately, we don't have any of our facilitators here. They were unable to attend, and we also weren't able to secure the attendance of a Selection Advisory Committee member. I believe, Mandy, you were in the Selection Advisory Committee interviews, correct? So if anyone has any questions at the end kind of about that process, I would ask you to direct the questions to Mandy, because beyond what I've given you here, which was provided to me, I wasn't there, so I can't answer those questions for you. And so the changes to the PSET plan, do we have copies of those available to Trevon? I apologize. So my colleague, I'd asked him to print copies of the PSET plan for everyone. So like I said, we are bringing a few changes to the PSET plan to council next Wednesday. So I just wanted to kind of go through what those changes are. The big change is the youth process. Initially, the city committed to 11 seats on the PSEP, on the Portland Committee for Community Engaged Policing. We really value youth input. When you consider Stoneman Douglas and the impact that high school aged youth have on just policies and change generally, we wanted to create space, intentionally create space for high school aged youth. And so we added 2 seats to the PSEP, to the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing. So now it will be a 13-member board. And those 2 seats will always be reserved for high school aged youth. So though the application, sorry, I'm reading this. We carved out like a youth selection process. It's not very different from like the general selection process, but we really wanted to follow best practices for youth adult partnerships. So instead of one-on-one interviews, for example, we conducted, as I told you earlier, group interviews. Having 2 high school aged youth sit on the PSEP together, the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, is also best practices. They will be voting members. We received some pushback about that from an unnamed group, but it is very important that we respect their participation and value their input. The truth is that they're ready to participate. They're ready to engage. They're ready to bring kind of their ideas to the table, and I think we need to honor that by allowing them to vote. So they will carry as much weight as any other member, as any adult member on the Portland Committee for Community Engaged Policing. But that doesn't mean, though, with the carved out selection process, that any youth who applies through like the regular process will not be like folded in somehow. So I left out, sorry, I'm kind of going through the process in my head. We're also reaching out to different school districts. So David Douglas, Park Rose, and Portland Public Schools, just for recommendations. If it doesn't mean that anyone who's not a student at these schools, that they wouldn't be able to apply to sit on the board. They will be folded into this process. That doesn't mean that someone from like Rosemary Anderson, for example, could not apply and sit on this board. It's just another avenue. We want to be really, really intentional about our outreach, targeting diverse school districts, and making sure that we're capturing as many youths as possible. Another change, we are just clarifying some terms. So volunteers will serve 2-year terms with the option to reapply at the end of a term. And in accordance with city policy for advisory boards and commissions, volunteers can serve no more than 8 years on the Portland Committee for Community Engaged Policing. The current language in the PSEP plan is just really vague. And so we thought this was a good opportunity to just make it clear to the public kind of what our intentions are around term limits and whatnot. Under member responsibilities, so before members sit for their first meeting, we're asking that they attend a retreat and go through training. So one of the big requirements is that they attend Community Academy, and also that they participate in a ride-along with PPB Patrol. While the preference and expectation is that they do so, we also want to be mindful of anyone who needs an ADA accommodation. And so we are providing reasonable accommodations when necessary that give an alternative, essentially, to Community Academy and to participating in the ride-along. So the accommodation for Community Academy will be to just observe a session of Community Academy and be given a guided tour of the PPB training division. The alternative to participating in a ride-along with a patrol officer is to do so with a BHU, Behavioral Health Unit officer, or a neighborhood response team officer, or participate in a morning walking beat. So there are a few options there. The other change, I had a conversation with the facilitators earlier, so I want to be really clear about this, especially kind of going into next Wednesday's council meeting. So the facilitators have a kind of robust community engagement plan. They're really not interested in doing business as usual. And so part of that is meeting Portlanders, meeting you where you are, right? So just having meetings around the city, and the focus is to have community gatherings where there is a focus, where there's effort around kind of building connections, sharing information, and really connecting with our neighbors in a more informal setting. So with, the current language speaks to roundtables and town halls. And the town halls are kind of like they're a concept from like the 1980s. They tend to be more traditional. They tend to really only allow individuals to speak for 2 minutes at a time. Like, you're not engaging in the way, how do I say this? There isn't as much opportunity to fully engage the city through a town hall, right? So our facilitators are looking at more creative means to fully engage the public and gather as much information as possible about where you are around certain policies. And this was actually done through Portland Parks and Rec, according to Hoon Tang from Training for Transformation. And they were able to just like have a barbecue, honestly, and collect a lot of information about changes that need to be made to parks policies. And so they want to do something similar for the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing. That's one thing that they want to do, I want to make clear. And they want to do so on a fairly regular basis. And so it's the change, when you'll see the document, it crosses out roundtables and crosses out quarterly town halls. That does not mean that they are not options. We're really encouraging PCEP to have a hand, along with the facilitators, in structuring what community engagement should look like and how it would be most effective. So community gatherings is one, right? But they want it to be regular. So their intention is to have quarterly community gatherings, and that's not entirely clear from the amended language. So I just want to make that clear to you all. They absolutely believe that community engagement is important, and they want to build upon the work of the PCEP plan to provide a more expansive view or approach to community engagement under the settlement agreement, but also beyond the settlement agreement. They really view the PCEP plan as a floor rather than as like the box that like, this is all existing within. So one other idea is to have office hours. And that involves PCEP members, that would involve facilitators, and it really is, again, meeting the community where it currently is. And so, their view is that PCEP meetings should not be the only opportunity for the community to engage PCEP or the city. And so they really want to have kind of like additional opportunities for there to be this kind of like information exchange and policy development that go beyond the strictures or the confines of the PCEP plan. I think one other idea as well would be to have kind of like a traveling like video box around the city, which apparently is being done in other jurisdictions. I have never heard of this, but it sounded really exciting, and so I wanted to share it with you all. And the whole point is really just that you go into a box and you record a message for the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing. As a community member, you record a message, and that goes to the committee, that goes to the city. And it's an easier way to reach as many people as possible when not everyone can attend a meeting in the evening or come downtown or drive across town, because there are obviously limitations and people have families or jobs or whatever the case is. And so we're really trying to provide flexibility and using technology to be more creative about how we engage community and how we accomplish this work. Another big change, a reduction in the number of monthly meetings. Currently, 2 monthly meetings are required by the PCEP plan. And in speaking with the facilitators, and we thought this before, and we've had a lot of conversations about this, it's not tenable. Between having high school-aged youth on this board and just, again, people having families and jobs, we really want to be cognizant of everyone's bandwidth. And so the plan right now is to have one monthly meeting and have that meeting be 3 hours in length. And I don't want to speak for the facilitators on their plan for these meetings, but again, they want to use technology to fully engage the public and provide an opportunity as well for PSEP members to actually get their work done. Excuse me. But it was very important to the AMAC that we allow an opportunity for public comment. And so these meetings will generally be open to the public. And there will be an opportunity for public comment prior to deliberations and prior to voting. And so we feel kind of very good about the conversation that we had with the AMAC. Our facilitators met with them once, and then on the changes to the PSEP plan, we consulted with both the AMAC and the PPA, and so there has been kind of robust engagement, and now we're bringing the changes to City Council for approval. And so that's really it in a nutshell. That was a lot of information. I appreciate you letting me kind of ramble for a little bit. Does anyone have any questions? And Mandy has the microphone.
Yeah, thank you for telling us about those possible amendments and what's going on. I heard your ADA accommodation, and I appreciate that I work with Disability Rights Oregon, I appreciate that you're thinking about that. I don't know who's applied, I don't know what accommodations might be needed, but they might be different than what you're envisioning. And so under the ADA, really the person who needs the accommodation is the one who would tell you what it is they need to effectively participate or effectively communicate or that kind of thing. So I just want to be sure that you're not thinking that those are like catch-all possibilities, but examples, so that people wouldn't feel like they're precluded from asking for reasonable accommodations because they don't fit into one of those boxes.
So I think there's a lot of kind of room for discussion with that. I mean, we could have negotiated the changes to the PSEP plan with the Portland Police Association and the AMAC. And so I think, the Portland Police Association, I think, is amenable with kind of explanation to accommodating PSEP members as needed. But the document I also know is the document. And I don't know, Tracy, how much flexibility we have there currently.
Sorry, one brief pause, everyone. Because we're on film tonight, it's important that we all speak into the microphones, which is why I asked Tracy to pause. Sorry.
Yes, I think absolutely it's true that the ADA accommodation process requires a back and forth. The PSEP plan represents an attempt to balance what some folks raised as possible accommodations with the need for people who are serving on the PSEP to also take some steps to have a basic understanding of the law enforcement function. And so if additional accommodations were needed, we would engage in the interactive process. But it is an effort to, there were some language proposed around that, and this was a back and forth to try to identify some alternatives that might balance some of the concerns that were articulated while still achieving that objective of a baseline understanding of the law enforcement function.
Hey, Mandy. Philip asked.
Was Philip first? Okay.
Philip raised his hand first.
Hello, this is Philip. I have a lot of questions, but I'll start with just one. In regards to accommodations, you mentioned an attempt to use technology as a way for people to make comments through video form. And I just want to make sure that those videos will be captioned. And I have a question for you. Will you be captioning those?
Yes.
Wonderful. And then can I ask a second question?
Yes.
I have a question in regards to the interview process. So this Wednesday, the interviews should be finished, and then they'll be announced. Is that correct?
Tomorrow, Thursday, the interviews will be finished. We have at least one youth interview scheduled for tomorrow. Deliberations will be next week, and then sometime the following week, announcements will be made. So that's kind of the goal for the announcement schedule.
Okay, it's my understanding that you plan to bring these changes to City Council on Wednesday. Is that correct?
Correct.
So I do have a concern with that timeline. If one of the potential applicants who's applied for a seat on the PSEP, if that individual will have time to deliberate if they actually want to participate, maybe read through some of the information, maybe they have a conflict with their employer or something, providing them enough time to make a determination and then getting response back to you. And if some of those candidates do decline to participate, do you have a plan for alternates or replacements for those people?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Selection Advisory Committee recommended 3 alternates. But the mayor ultimately decides, right, like who the alternates like should be. But then I'll say this too, though, in response to your earlier point. At this juncture, anyone can change their mind if they no longer wish to participate on the committee. But I would expect or hope that they would have made that decision before applying or dropped out at some point during the process.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kelsey Moreland. I am a client underneath the PSRB. I did volunteer for DRO for about 3.5 years. So PSRB, Psychiatric Security Review Board. And I'm here to make sure that the population is represented. And when I was listening to the percentages of this panel, I was extremely concerned when you said it was 15%. And PSRB would be mixed in with different populations. And I don't know if people are aware, but most PSRB clients that are conditionally released from the state hospital into the community come to Portland. It is one of the biggest counties in the state that clients come to reintegrate successfully. And I'm extremely concerned that there potentially isn't a PSRB client or a former PSRB client on the panel. And I know that there's bad publicity on people that are on conditional release or have been jurisdictionally discharged from the board. And my concern is that the negative interactions that have happened could be prevented by a peer voice. So is there a potential for that to be looked into?
So I just want to be clear. Being a PSRB, would that qualify then, I assume, as lived experience? Or?
A PSRB client is somebody who has either pled or been given a diversion. Instead of going to prison, it's not a conviction. It's called guilty except for insanity in Oregon.
Okay.
And they have committed a crime, and they're considered they're considered not accountable for their crime because of their mental health condition at the time of their instant offense.
Okay. Mandy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that would have been weighted as at 25% and not 15%.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why I was asking the question, because I thought that it was really 25. So I'll kind of go through the categories again. Lived experience as a member of a marginalized community, 25%. Lived experience with mental or physical health conditions, 25%. Interpersonal skills, 15%. Experience working within or advocating for marginalized communities, 15%. and experience utilizing social services and engaging government processes, 15%.
Okay. I just kind of, by the definition, I feel like there should be room for a forensic peer, somebody who's been in the state hospital or has been in the behavioral health unit at the state penitentiary, or has had arrests leading to jail time within the mental health system. I personally feel like that's not defined clearly enough. And then if I could ask a second question is, I just found this out on Facebook, so I decided to come because I'm doing some freelance advocacy. And I would like to encourage you to reach out to the providers in Portland for PSRB. And if you don't know what they are, I can gladly tell you. They're CODA, Cascadia Behavioral Health Care, and Lukendorf. And if you could reach out to those providers and let them know, and they could get the information to the clients, and then you might have a better representation.
So with the applications, I won't get into who the candidates are for the board. And again, the mayor's office kind of didn't control for that. Obviously, we weren't involved. But looking at kind of the demographic breakdown, 16% of applicants kind of identified as having a disability, and of the 16, 63% responded, or checked the mental health piece. I don't know, like kind of as far as specifics are concerned, what that looked like across written applications, or what the conversations were among the selection advisory committee. But I hear your point, and I think kind of going forward, making sure with like the next round of applications in a year and in 2 years, we're actively engaging DRO and trying to. I think we had Daryl Walker on the selection advisory committee, but he's just one person, obviously, and I don't know what individual outreach.
I would encourage communications with Sarah Radcliffe and Timothy Roselle. They work on the PAMI Council, which stands for Protection and Advocacy for Individuals with Mental Illness. And I believe that they would have great suggestions for you.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I used to chair the council, so.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah, so after this meeting, if we could touch base, and also Mandy, if you could be a part of that conversation, just so there's a relationship going forward and we get the names and contact info, that would be helpful.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jack Peak. I've lived in Southeast Portland for about 35 years. I was a past president of the Foster Pal Neighborhood Association, and I know I could write a book about this PSRB issue. And I'll tell you why. Neil Barrows from Cascadia Behavioral Healthcare, now it was Network, now it's Cascadia, approached me as the president. In fact, I come home from a business trip, and he said, Jack, would you mind some nice mentally ill people in your backyard? We're going to buy that house back there, and we really need the Neighborhood Association's seal of approval because we're going to go to Portland Development Commission and get the money to buy the place. Nice mentally ill people, okay, fine. So we went along with it.
Jacob, just wonder if you have a question that's related
It's related.
Okay, please.
Thank you. The PSRB issue has killed 5 people so far. 2 in Portland, patient to patient, patient to caregiver, and one of the guys that was released, saying that he was just fine, killed again. I have been working for 10 years to can't get rid of these places, but I've been working for 10 years to get notification to first responders like yourself. You don't know when they're coming. Why are you going to shut me off? Yeah, you do.
I'm going to, thanks, Jack.
Doctors say I got a year to live, so I give up. You and I will talk as soon. Because we have to have that bill down in Salem to get you guys notification. Because I know you don't know. Come on. Right. You want community outreach around. This is why Portland politics suck.
Okay, so I want to.
Debbie had a question.
Yes, but can I say something about what just happened? I've known Jack a long time. been around this issue a long time, and I do want his participation. And I really want to respect what you have brought forward in your life experience and what's going on. And the conversation about psychiatric review board release is really a separate conversation, and I just can't imagine that was easy for you, so I apologize for that.
I'm perfectly okay with it. And that's the part of stigma that, I face every day. A lot of people don't realize when they meet me that I'm a PSRB client. And a lot of my peers, present the same way. People can get better with support, and why I came to this event is I want more positive interactions with the police and PSRB clients. I lost my friend Eric Griffin in April. He jumped off a bridge onto I-5 in Portland. And, that's a long result of dealing and struggling with mental health issues. And, that's why I really want to encourage, there has been deaths, and, we are people. We don't just shuffle around. I spent almost 8 years in the state hospital because there was nowhere for me to go. I was 4 years into it. I was ready to leave, and there was nowhere to place me. So I encourage everybody in this room to rethink about how they think about people with mental illness.
Thank you, and I'm glad you're here. Someone else had a question? Dan?
I have a bunch of questions, but I'll start with this one. Did the city, when they talked about opening up office hours, they look back at the history of the COAB and realize that Justice Dominguez had offered office hours when he started as a facilitator for the COAB? And he actually set up an office in East Portland to make that happen. And I think that he was moved out of there because there wasn't enough security in the building where he had brought his office. Did you know about that history?
I personally didn't, but regardless, I appreciate your bringing that up. This would also involve all PSEP members in addition to the facilitators. And so I think, the goal of the facilitators is to really make PSEP members accessible to the public. So it goes beyond the facilitators, it goes beyond whoever is identified as the chair and is extended to the board itself. And, it's not a concrete office. We're not talking about a brick and mortar location, but rather identifying areas around Portland, North Portland, Northeast Portland, Southeast Portland, Southwest, any coffee shop, library, community center where the facilitators and PSEP members will be available to the public to answer questions or have conversations.
Okay, so my other question that I'm going to ask, and then I'll turn the microphone back over, is at least one, but surely one of the COAB members, when going through the community academy, refused to use a gun, which is something that I, as a peace activist, very much respect. But yet he was treated as less than by the police and other members of the board because he did that. Do you expect that kind of treatment will happen again if a member of the PCCEP decides not to use a gun?
No, through the PSEP plan, the PCCEP plan, we're laying out our intentions and our expectations, right? Our expectation is ultimately that any member of this committee will be able to collaborate and work with members around policy development, around training. And that's why we're providing kind of the accommodations that we are. And so, we have fantastic facilitators. We really want to kind of put supports around this process so that people feel encouraged and supported where they are, wherever they are. And, in my experience, working with the mayor to interview the candidates that we have, there's a wide range of experiences, people with lived experience, people who have peer support backgrounds. And so I would be very shocked, actually, if judgment were leveled because someone didn't, or was not able, rather, to participate in Community Academy. This is a very open process, and we really are looking for people with varied experiences. Participating in Community Academy does not make you a good PCCEP member or a bad one. That's only a piece of it. And so, does that answer your question? Okay. Well, say that again, I'm sorry. I'm talking about avoiding the entire academy?
Hold on just a second.
Or, thank you.
Wait, Dan, I apologize. Yeah, no worries.
No, it sounds like you're saying that if they decide to avoid going to the academy and take an alternate, plan, that should not be looked down upon. I'm saying if they go to the academy and say, I'm not going to participate in this, that, or the other part of this training, that should also be okay.
So either way, right, it's not about avoiding the academy. Either they participate in the community academy or they observe the community academy. And as Tracy mentioned earlier, to the extent that there needs to be more flexibility around the accommodations, like that's a conversation that we would have with the Portland Police Association down the line. We fully recognize that there are parts of the community academy that could be traumatic for individuals. Like that's the point of the accommodations. And so the PSEP plan is the PSEP plan. Again, it's a floor. There is room for conversations with the Portland Police Association on the reasonable accommodations that are provided. But I can't speak to any specifics at this point. But I'm letting you know that the city is coming or is approaching this with the best of intentions, and we want to provide a safe environment for PCCEP members at all stages.
All right. I just want to make it very clear. I guess my question is about, it's not necessarily a traumatic issue or a mental health issue if you do not want to fire a gun. That's a moral decision or a personal decision, and it's not necessarily an ADA accommodation. And so it should also be something that's a decision that gets to be made by a person regardless of the reason they're making the decision.
So we're providing a reasonable accommodation around like ADA considerations. What you're speaking to, if there's an absolute refusal to participate, then I would question the ability of that person to sit on the PCCEP. Go ahead, Tracy.
As to the specifics, there is no requirement to participate in the academy or to observe the academy that anybody fire a gun if they don't want to. So that is not a requirement. It does not even require an accommodation.
I'm going to get Taylor and then Debbie.
Just to circle back a bit, when I speak to people in the community, there seems to be a little bit of confusion. If you just clarify for me, and I feel as though most people in here, they should have a general understanding, but what's the city's expectations as far as the role PPB will play with the PSEP's dealings and how each entity will support each other moving forward?
So the city is required, the mayor and the chief of police are required to sit down with the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, I think at least twice a year. So there is that kind of face-to-face time. And then around policy development, the committee will be around the table with PPB's policy development team. I haven't met with their team yet to kind of like map out what that process will look like. But this is not a matter, of sending emails into a void or sharing information with the DOJ. It will be kind of like a face-to-face interaction, and feedback is required. And so to the extent recommendations are given, the city would be required to kind of offer feedback within a certain period of time to let the PCCEP know, okay, this is why we couldn't accept this recommendation, or we're incorporating whatever else recommendation into our plans. And I think that's it. Like, we are really trying to kind of get officers on board. There are opportunities to meet with officers in a meeting setting. It really just depends on what the PCCEP is looking for. And so our office, the mayor's office, to the extent that there are specific requests or demands, our office would facilitate that. And so to the extent that you would need to meet with, for example, the behavioral health unit, we would facilitate that and get a representative at the table for you. To the extent that you would want to meet with the neighborhood response team, we would get a representative to sit at the table with you and kind of discuss your concerns, or I think there's a lot of room here for like what that relationship will look like going forward, but a lot of it depends on what PCCEP members would like to accomplish. But we're here as the mayor's office to like facilitate that work and make sure that the Bureau is accountable to the board and ultimately accountable to the community.
Thank you.
Debbie, I own a League of Women Voters. This may be a little early to ask, but I'm curious. A lot of times in Portland, large advisory committees break up into subcommittees or work groups. Do you anticipate that with the PCCEP, if they do that those meetings will be open to public observation?
Thank you so much for asking that question. That is an additional change to the PSEP plan that I forgot to mention earlier. There will be subcommittees and they will be open to the public.
Just want to make sure. Is anyone? I know. I appreciate that. Okay, you're on. I'm sorry.
So what's the other 5%? Well, you said 50, 50 plus 15 plus 15 plus 15. That's 95.
50-50. That is what was provided to me by our facilitators. I don't know, Mandy, if you could answer that or if the percentages are wrong. This is what Brad Taylor sent me.
Just wondering.
Lived experience as a member of a marginalized community, I'm sorry, 30%. Lived experience with mental or physical health issues, 25%. That's my typo in my document.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan.
That's helpful. So my second question now is, you talked about these changes coming to City Council next Wednesday, which is a very short turnaround time for the community. That means that they will be published Friday, then Monday is Labor Day, and then people are expected to come and testify on Wednesday. So it's a very short turnaround time for the community to look at those changes. So I'll just leave it at that and hope that maybe other people will try to convince you to change that. But related to that, you're separating the appointment of the members to another time later in September, you're saying. And then Judge Simon's having his hearing on October 4th, the Thursday morning at 9 o'clock. Will that appointment be a report to the council, or will it be something where public can testify as to the appointments and the status of the PCCEP?
I would have to check with our legislative director, Michelle Planbeck, on kind of the general format of appointments and just what our procedures are within the city for that. Like I don't know that offhand, but I can look into that and email you.
Okay, it's just so everybody in the room knows why I'm asking this question. Several times this year, there have been items on the City Council agenda, including this morning, where they appointed new members of the Human Rights Commission, but it was listed as a report, and because the City Council is not required to take testimony from the community about reports in the City Council chambers, you can write your comments, but you can't speak at City Council. The mayor has made a blanket decision that he doesn't want any testimony and reports. So I'm hoping that maybe I'm not alone here, hoping that the community will have a chance to testify about those appointments.
Thank you. Charles Bridge Crane Johnson, and I think we'll start off with echoing Mr. Handelman's concern. If organizations, whether it's the Human Rights Commission or the PSEP, the Portland Commission on Community Engaged Policing, really want to, whether they themselves or the mayor wants them to look like independent, effective, community-engaged organizations, they can't have their time on the City Council agenda be a report where they come up and say, we're going to blah, blah, and to heck with whatever the people want to say. You should have done that somewhere else, some other time. I would hope that the situation that was mentioned this morning, where human rights commissioners come to a dog and pony show run by the mayor, where the community people cannot speak about the members because of an administrative choice that's made on an agenda, is something that the facilitators for PSEP and yourself, Mandy, and yourself would talk to the mayor about, that when PSEP comes up on the agenda, presenting it as a report. It's a terrible idea that basically says, Screw the public. If you didn't make it to our other meetings, we don't give a crap what you think. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Megan Gage, and I may have misunderstood tonight's event a little bit in that I took the opportunity to ask the city questions and offer comment on the current state of policing in Portland a little bit literally, as in this is not as connected to the PSEP. So I just wanted to offer that first and make sure that that was okay right now. Thank you. Okay.
There's still an opportunity to that point. There's still an opportunity to offer comments and ask questions around that. That's why I asked Deputy Chief Day to attend. So yeah, but I wanted to make sure that there was engagement around PSEP.
Great. Thank you so much. And I was unfamiliar with PSEP, and now I am, so thank you, and I appreciate that. Again, my name is Megan. I was at the protest August 4th, and I believe that Portland Police's violent response was unwarranted and disproportionate. Portland Police has had 3 weeks to perform the investigations that Chief Outlaw said they needed to do to answer many of the questions posed at the press conference following the police's violent response to protesters on August 4th. As such, I would like to ask the questions that still need answering in order for the police to be held accountable for their actions that day. I have 4 questions. I will read them all, and then I'll read them one by one. 1, why was Patriot Prayer allowed to cross NATO Parkway against police orders and not face any crowd control measures when they violated that direct order? 2, was the decision to have officers fire their aerial distraction device canisters directly at the crowd when their training requires they fire 15 degrees above a crowd a planned decision or a mistake? 3, was the decision to fire flashbangs before a call to leave the premises a planned decision or a mistake? And 4, why did the police chase and throw to the ground someone leaving the premises? So I'll return to my first question, and I'm happy to, intermingle these throughout the evening to give people a chance to talk. So the first question is, again, why was Patriot Prayer allowed to cross NATO Parkway against police orders and did not face any crowd control measures when they violated that direct order?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for the questions. Unfortunately, the Independent Police Review is handling all of that. The Police Bureau is not involved in that investigation, so I can't answer those questions. 1, I don't know the answers to them, and 2, they need to be asked of the Independent Police Review. So I would encourage you to get a hold of them, make sure that those are added to the questions they're asking of the organization, but I can't comment on it directly. 1, I don't know the answers, and 2, it wouldn't be appropriate for me while the investigation's ongoing. The Police Bureau is not doing the investigation. It's being handled completely outside of the Police Bureau.
Okay. Thank you so much for that answer. When do you expect that review be finished?
I don't know. I mean, it's that separate that the Independent Police Review has all of that. And so anything that's come into the Police Bureau, we ship over to them as they handle the reviews. So that's really who you need to ask.
Sure. How can the public expect accountability in terms of being able to find out an answer if we don't know who to turn to for the answer about when that will actually be finished? If you don't know that answer, right, how do we know when to ask for these questions to be answered?
I guess I don't quite understand your question. I'm sorry.
If you don't know when those questions will be answered, how can we know?
Well, we'd have to do it the same way. I mean, we'd have to contact the Independent Police Review and ask them what their plan is, what their schedule is, where they're at on the investigation, as anybody would.
Great, thank you. So I'm sure there have been other independent police reviews. What is the average time that those might take for an incident of this size?
I can't speculate on that. I mean, they run the gamut from, can take many, many months. I've seen them take up to a year. I'm sure Mr. Handelman has even better idea to answer those questions than I do. Wouldn't be the first time I've been in a public setting where he's either corrected me or known the answer more accurately, so I don't mind deferring to Dan on that. But I would say it is not uncommon to take at least several months, and if it took a year, I would not be the first time.
Okay. Again, I really appreciate you responding. I think it's completely inappropriate as a member of Portland Police to defer to a community member for such an official date like this and a request. Dan, we are fortunate to have Dan in our community, but the Portland Police must be held accountable for their actions, which again were unwarranted and disproportionate and represent, again, unwarranted, disproportionate. I'm going to repeat my other questions because I said I would. The second question was the decision to have officers fire their aerial distraction device canisters directly at the crowd when their training requires they fire 15 degrees above a crowd, was that a planned decision or a mistake? Would you like to respond to that one?
Yeah, you have to refer all the questions to the independent police review, please.
Okay, I'm going to ask just the other two, too. Thank you. Was the decision to fire flashbangs before a call to leave the premises a planned decision or a mistake? I presume your answer is the same, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity. Why did the police chase and throw to the ground someone leaving the premises?
And the same, refer that to the independent police review. Thank you.
Okay, and then I have one final question. Were you yourself at this protest?
I was in parts of the Justice Center as the protest was going on. There was a brief period of time towards the end where I was down on NATO Parkway briefly, but that was the extent of it. Primarily in the Justice Center or briefly down at NATO Parkway.
Okay, so from your experience, do you know why the police opted to use the tactics that they did?
It would not be appropriate for me to comment at this time on an ongoing investigation and whether or not the tactics used were consistent with policy or training. We need to wait for that to all be vetted out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. My name is Soraya. I live in Southeast. I have very similar questions. I would love to hear the answers to all of those, particularly because how directly those issues affect the safety of anyone who wants to peaceably assemble on the streets of their town against, in this case, out of town, out of state, fascist hate group and militia members. And I'm wondering if we can, I've heard what you said about the independent police review. I will certainly look forward to the outcome of that whenever it may be available. A couple additional questions. It sounded like the police were saying that they had video of attack by the anti-racist group before they initiated their attack. I'm wondering if that video has been forthcoming, has come out. And then in a related question, I'm wondering if the chief has made any updates to her statements that anti-racist protesters were all, I guess, looking for trouble, looking to start trouble, and or being whiny. I wonder if she has any updates.
So in regards to the first question, in terms of the video, I don't know the answer to that. Once again, and I can't stress enough our desire to try and utilize the independent police review as they gather information. Anything that we have is provided to them, but I haven't seen or looked into the details of that because of the ongoing investigation. In regards to the chief's comments, I'm not able to speak to that. Obviously, if you wanted to reach out to the police bureau, there's a variety of different ways to communicate, and she has had numerous interviews and spoken about this on multiple occasions in terms of her comments following, since then, updating. I don't have anything to add to that.
Hi, Jill Hymanson. I am not entirely familiar with the independent police review, but I was wondering what their authority is, and if, for example, do they have the ability to go over any videotapes that were of the August 4th event, or what kind of information do they have available to do their review? And authority.
Authority in what? Or
I mean, basically, are they just, they go through it and they make a recommendation and then it goes into the Netherlands, or they actually, listen to them, or I'm just wondering what the process is. I don't know.
So I think I can take a basic crack at that. I'm Tracy Reeve. I'm the Portland City Attorney. And the Independent Police Review is part of the independently elected auditor's office. By code, they have the authority to conduct independent investigations of the Police Bureau. They have access to anything that they want from the Police Bureau. They have complete access to Police Bureau information. And in fact, the independently elected auditor has, by both code and charter, authority to access basically any city records from any bureau. So there is very full access to any information that they want from the Police Bureau or from any other entity in the city of Portland.
The second part was they make a, you know, maybe they make their findings and the recommendation, and then what happens?
Well, that will depend on what their findings and recommendations are. They don't have authority to implement that. They make the findings, and then those go to the police commissioner, the chief of police. Those are publicly available, and so it will depend on what those findings are. But they're an investigating agency. They have the ability to make findings, publicize those findings. They don't have the ability to implement changes in the Police Bureau.
Just on historically, so if they do make recommendations, I mean, I know probably difficult to do a percentage, but like, is it common that, you know, they make a recommendation and then the Police Bureau actually takes their recommendations and makes changes?
That has certainly happened, and I couldn't just standing here give you any kind of percentages. Another major thing that they do is they also, in addition to larger sort of investigations of larger incidents like this, they also regularly investigate officer misconduct, and then that goes through the normal discipline process as it would if it were conducted by internal affairs. So in that instance, they do have the same investigative authority as it would be, and that would have the same impact as if it came out of Police Bureau internal affairs.
Oh, cool. All right, thank you.
Thank you again, Charles Bridgecrane, and I guess I was able to jump ahead of Pat. Being less familiar with the IPR, if you want to get the background, the website, portlandoregon.gov/IPR, will be there. This work is a little different. IPR work that's unresolved sometimes goes to the Citizen Review Committee, but that's only when there's an individual complainant. So if anybody from the August 4th demonstrations files an individual complaint with IPR, and the individual filing the complaint disagrees with IPR's results, that could go through the Citizen Review Committee process. Some people who might be complainants are sometimes advised by their legal counsel that that's not a productive avenue in the eyes of the legal counsel for individuals when they're pursuing a tort case against the city. So we don't know if that'll happen yet. I don't know if there have been any. And that's actually something that I think that the lady with the 4 questions we should also ask is, have there been individual complainants? And I don't know if what the city's policy is, but has Risk Assessment Office of the city yet received any tort notifications from odd things like having a aerial dispersal device splashed into the back of your head and smashing your helmet and sending you to the emergency room? So I appreciate all these questions coming on. I think I would like to supplement the question that was raised. If you know, it's usually, I think, a Chris Burley item. If the chief of police finds that the best place to engage with some parts of the public is through the Lars Larson radio show, and not here with actual citizens, I think that's a question we can take to our elected officials and also discuss in this room. Thanks.
I am Pat Adams, a community member, and what comes to me about this, I've attended some of these meetings and quite a few of the COAB meetings back then, and it seemed to me that the real theme going through it all was justice and the need for justice. And certainly there's no peace without justice. There's no safety without justice, and there's no real relationship police to the community without justice. And I find our criminal justice system pretty inadequate. It seems as if the victims have no power and that the police are so often justice proof. And still, I don't think the answer is revenge. I don't think it's punishment. And I don't think it's incarceration. There is another form of justice called restorative justice. And its purpose is to indeed make a justice system where people can indeed live together. It was used in Africa for some of the genocide. It's been used in Canada around the government schools that they forced the Native Americans into. And the other thing about it is that it works historically. And I thought another thing about the COAB was it's trying to start from a clean slate, right? Let's go forward. And I think it's important that we not go forward, that we address the harms of the past and the injustices of the past. So I would encourage the PSEP to at least look at this restorative justice, these restorative justice practices as a way to make a solid foundation on which to build a better relationship, both for the safety of the officers when they go in the neighborhood and for the safety of the neighborhood when the officers are present.
We got 3, so. Okay, okay.
My name is Sam Sachs, community member, founder of the No Hate Zone. I just have a question and a suggestion. Has Constantine ever spoke at one of these meetings? Okay.
Several times.
Okay. I was just going to suggest there seems to be some need for more clarity about the IPR, so maybe down the road he can come back. That was my question and suggestion.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Sam. As many of you know, I think it was the July Community Forum. We plan to have IPR, Constantine Severe, the IPR director, here to essentially kind of present on IPR's process and their role within the city, because there's so much confusion around that. And a decision was made by the auditor to cancel the event. And we were incredibly disappointed. It happened at the last minute. It's quite unfortunate. But our hope is that sometime soon we'll be able to get Constantine in front of you all so that you can, so that he can answer your questions and you can engage him. I know Constantine personally, and he loves kind of this kind of feedback and has always been quite engaging. But he has a boss, so.
I just have again, Megan Gage. I have a pretty simple question for the representative of the Portland Police. When is Portland Police going to stop killing people of color?
I appreciate that question. I know that the Police Bureau is committed to safety for everyone in the community. And it's a priority of ours through all of our efforts around training, around community outreach, around relationship building, to minimize conflicts, to reduce the amount of force required in incidents that we come in involved with. But it would be inappropriate for me to suggest that there will never be another law enforcement officer-involved shooting. I can't commit to that. It certainly would be a desire of mine and a goal of mine that that would never happen again, but I cannot assure that in any way.
Thank you for your honesty.
Hi again. I just kind of wanted to break down the tone of negativity in the room, and I wanted to take a moment and recognize the Portland Police Bureau for their hard efforts. Like just yesterday, there was a notification that the North Precinct did an autism outreach thing. And for those of you that don't know me personally, I had a cousin that was shot and killed by the Portland police in 2001. His name was Raymond Youngberg, and there was miscommunication that happened. It was an extreme loss for my family, but when I got that Facebook notification, I was extremely proud of you guys. The progress that you've made since 2001 to today is extraordinary. You guys work very hard. And the behavioral health unit, I met with Chris Wilwright last week, and and he met with me personally to hear my experience at the state hospital, my experience under the PSRB, and actually listened to my suggestions. And I'm not the only one. My friends Ann Casper and Kevin Fitz, all these wonderful advocates and activists in the community, you actually listen. And I do want to, recognize, at least one individual in this room sees your guys' effort, and you guys are making progress. At least if you look at the timeline from 2001 to today, you're doing great. And just, keep it up. And, we're all imperfect, but, I believe in you guys, and I see the progress.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hello. My name is Zach Kramer. I own several buildings in Portland. I own a bunch of businesses in Portland. I employ a few dozen people. I've never actually come to a meeting like this before. Let me start by saying this is really cool. That the city is here and the police are here and the people are here. This is neat. I have a couple of concerns I want to ask you about as the police. The first thing I worry about is the cost of these events. That's not the first thing. That's one of the things I worry about. I pay a fair amount of taxes, but it's a lot in terms of dollars. And when I see all the black-clad officers lined up in rows, and then I see them shooting into the crowds, and I think about the lawsuits that are going to come out of that and all the money that's going to cost, I get bothered about that and worried about that we're not spending our resources wisely in how we address these incidents. The other thing that I really worried about with this particular one in particular, and seeing Chief Outlaw's interview on the Lars Larson show, is that the mayor and the police don't understand that the behavior they're exhibiting is inviting them back, the white supremacists. It's inviting them to come back. Their Facebook groups are open. I'm an interested person, so I look at their Facebook groups after they do these things, right? And they celebrate, and they cheer, and they say, yeah, we got their own police to attack them. We got their own police officers to go after them. We got to go back and do it again. And so every time this happens, they just want to come back and cause more chaos and cost us more money and cause more problems. And for me as a business owner, especially a business owner in the hospitality space, for the first time, I've heard guests complain about the homeless. That's a common complaint, and I get that that's a huge issue. This was the first time I'd heard guests scared, saying they were scared for their safety, right, after the events that had occurred, and whether or not the police could be trusted. I had one quote the Lars Larson interview and say, God, your police chief, she's kind of a gangster. And I was taken aback, because that's not who I want our police chief to be, and that's not how I want the police to behave. And so I guess my question is, do you guys get that the way the police are responding to these events is encouraging more of these events to happen?
Well, I can tell you that we put a lot of thought and effort and planning into try and manage any of these events, regardless of the participants. I've served in the city for almost 30 years. No stranger myself to participating in, free speech events, either from, as a police officer, and my wife and I have participated in events as members and community members. So in, trying to find a spot in the public space where all voices can be heard and expressed in a way that's safe, is a tremendous challenge in today's age. And it's not just true of the city of Portland, it's true around the country, and we see it around the world. And unfortunately, I think that's indicative of some of the nature of the environment that we're living in today, and it saddens me. We have had a series of events specific with these two groups over the last 18 months to 2 years, and if you look back, the police response has varied in differing ways, and largely criticized after each event. And as the chief has stated numerous times, we are a learning organization, and we are constantly evaluating all of the tactics, all of the processes that we use. It would be my preference to not have to utilize the police in any of these, that people could come and participate and express their opinions and views freely without any police involvement. Like I said, having stood on many of these over the years, and I understand the concern and the criticism, but I'm always proud of the fact that we have a country where people still can come and express their views regardless of their opinions. But it's really challenging for us when we have, the amount of intensity around some of these conversations. So the answer is, yes, we are constantly evaluating and constantly reviewing. I can't speak for what is put out on social media, so I can't respond to, those perceptions or otherwise, but your comments I take to heart. Will include in part of the discussion. The comments of your patrons and people, customers coming in, et cetera, are valid. We're open to that feedback, and use that as learning and talking points for our next approach to whatever that might be.
Thank you.
Sam, Philip, and then Debbie is what I just saw.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just want to give some historical perspective. I've been here my whole life. My family's been here since the 40s. And I think that right now, what we're seeing with the Patriot Prayer and the protests, Portland has been the breeding ground for the white supremacy movement and hate groups for a long, long time, right? We're coming up on the 30th anniversary of the murder of Mulugeta Sarah, who was a Portland State student who was killed, beat to death by white supremacists on the streets. At one time, the Southern Poverty Law Center had 2 of the top 10 that terrify, on the top 10 that terrify list were from Portland, Oregon. So I just share that, like, this isn't new. It's been here for a long time, and I'm not condoning anything, but other than the Max killing, I don't think anyone has died yet or has been murdered at one of these events. And so we need to, I think we need to kind of keep a perspective that so far they build this, last event is the next Charlottesville, and it wasn't. So I don't want to, this has been going on for a long time. It's something we're going to be dealing with for a long time, and we need to be unified as a community and as a city to understand that moving forward. That's my perspective.
Hi, everyone. This is Philip Wolf. 2 questions that I would pose, and maybe more of a comment. One, and I forgot the gentleman sitting in the blue shirt over there, your name, but you expressing concern about the using police services and resources and paying into that and our resources and funds, and I do recognize that. I would like to point something out to consider. First of all, the fact that white supremacists want to use their ideas through, or share their ideas, but through the guise of freedom of speech, often is what is said. That's the right that they wish to exercise. And that has to be respected, of course. You can have a differing opinion, of course, but that right is respected. Last year, Mayor Ted Wheeler had a permit expire that they were not welcome to come, and the ACLU said they weren't actually allowed to do that due to the Constitution. It was unconstitutional, rather, excuse me. And so that's why they ended up allowing the white supremacist group to come in. And it was because they were suppressing freedom of speech. So using that as a guise, and we have to respect that. We can't allow freedom of speech to be taken away from us. So we do have to allow these people in to share their views. And Ted had said his hands are very tied in this situation. One thing that also came to mind is white supremacists from Vancouver, Washington don't pay Oregon taxes. And I think they're using our property to make their protests. It's really, it's an interesting angle to figure out how we could prevent that from happening. But that does lead to my second topic. I know that the police are still investigating, so I'm not asking any specifics about that because it is ongoing. But it will be public record. If Ted is watching and if the police chief is watching now, pay attention to this point. The officer in the back said that we're still learning from what's happening. Well, I'd like to take a moment and teach you something. Possibly in the future, when you know that there's an event that white supremacists are going to be coming into Portland and marching on Portland, I would strongly recommend that Ted and the chief of police and the community gather together and take a pulse on the community to see how we as a community want to address it, what that could look like. And the approach in the past has clearly not been working because it hasn't been community involved. So we need to figure out as a community together how to address this issue because it hasn't been successful. And with the police lines, they had the white boys in the community on opposite sides. In the middle, there were people encouraging to stay on either side and keep everyone to hold their own lines. But the police were facing us, the community. And I would think it would be more helpful and more equitable for it to be alternating. One person faced the community, one facing the other protesters. So you could get an equal view of each crowd. I think this hasn't helped in the past because I was there. I was there that day. I saw everything that happened. I've noticed that Portland police engaged more with the white boys. They were, the Proud Boys, excuse me. They were engaging and chatting with each other, and there was more community engagement with them, with the Proud Boys, than any community interactions. They had no community interactions. They were all engaging on the other side, and that, again, is not helpful. So we're here, and in the future, if you have to interact with them, fine, but you need to be doing the same for us. Check on us and say, they're gonna stay over here, you're gonna stay over here. Have that equitable interaction so it at least looks supportive. If you're looking supportive of them, of the Proud Boys, that's not helping us. So that's something to just keep in mind. And any time that the white supremacists come again, that's a test for us. And I do predict that they will come again. And I think we need the community, the chief of police, and Ted to come together and work together to be creative of ideas. And Antifa, I know I'm going on, but Antifa, that specific group, and there's other groups, DSA, and different organizations with different ideals, different political statements, and they all have different agendas. If we were all to come together and speak with each other, be on the same page, coordinate, agree to not throw anything towards the other groups, allow them to escalate, but keep us calm and with each other and united and on our same understanding. And I do think that would go better. That would build more trust, build more confidence. And for the chief of police and mayor to see that for themselves, that we can work together. It's time for you to include us in the process. Thank you.
So I have a follow-up question about the relationship between this report that the IPR is working on and the disciplinary process within the Bureau. So, you know, I understand that the Bureau can initiate investigations on individual police bureau members if they, you know, feel it's necessary. If there were some things that happened that were of concern in the demonstration, would that process, the investigation process, have started by now? Or is the Bureau waiting for the IPR report to be done?
Well, let me try and understand your question.
Okay.
If there has been a complaint filed around the protest, so a person saying excessive force was used, and IPR has that. IPR is doing the investigation. When that's completed, then it becomes part of the discipline process and is sent over to us and travels the typical route. And that should be happening. Anybody who's complained at this point, there should be an investigation ongoing. I can't verify that because we're not doing it. But, you know, if somebody called the Portland Police Bureau and said, I was at the August 4th event and this happened, we would refer them to IPR. We would not initiate that investigation on our part. The other expectation that I think we'll see from the August 4th review is likely some type of recommendations, which is not uncommon. IPR also, not IPR, but the auditor's office, as mentioned in their name, do audits oftentimes on multiple city bureaus, including the Portland Police Bureau. And so they will investigate the complaints, the individual complaints, and then they also may issue a report, and I say all this with the caveat that you have to talk to Director Severe, but they may issue a report that says, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe they take Philip's recommendations into consideration. Whatever it is, you know, they might say this or that. So to answer your question, I believe, is if there's been a complaint filed to this point, it should be ongoing. It should be being investigated at this point, would be my understanding.
So let me just ask a little more. So my understanding is you guys film when there are these street protests, and let's say that in one of the films you saw an individual police officer doing something that was out of policy. So it's pretty clear. I mean, I know there are Bureau initiated complaints. There's the B cases and the C cases, community member. So I'm curious if there were any things that the Bureau noticed in the films that they have of that incident. Would you have maybe started investigating through the B channel, you know, the B investigation avenue?
We would hand all that over to them as it relates. So everything would go to them, and I'm not aware of whether there's been any B cases or not at this point.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bradley. I was there on the 4th. It was my friend who got shot in the head with a flashbang. And I got a few comments on police, how they handled the protest. There were a few people from the waterfront side, the racist side, Proud Boys, I guess. They came over onto our side, and then they were let over back onto the waterfront side without being arrested, despite not complying with police orders. I can't imagine anyone from our side we would have been arrested if we had tried going over there. I'm sorry, I'm kind of a little nervous, public speaking and all. I'm sorry, I'll just stop there. Okay. I don't know. I'm just very, I'm very angry with the police bureau. The police bureau seems that as a organization, it identifies more with the out of town racists, the Proud Boys, than they do with their own city. They seem to just be there. And for the most part, they're doing a good job. Just keep the two sides apart so there's not people killing each other. But, and if you had just kept doing that the entire day, would have been all right. But you attacked people of your own city for no reason. The excuse was that we were throwing objects, but that's not on video anywhere. That is not, there's no evidence of that I've seen. So, I don't know. I don't really have a question, just comments.
Charles, if you don't mind, I'm gonna. Okay.
Hi, my name is Barbara Baker, and I was down there as well with Bridge Crane Johnson. And we were on the side with the Proud Boys, and we felt incredibly protected by the police because not one of them in the street was looking at what we were doing. There was a handful over by the water that kind of mingled and directed me towards some water when I asked. But I saw immediately what was happening, and that was my intention for being down there. I haven't been able to be in the street in a protest in a long time, but I've watched the stories over the last 3 years, and I had to go see for myself, and I couldn't have imagined, I couldn't have dreamed that I would see what I saw.
It was the issue, Charles Bridge Crane Johnson, and the issue has been touched on, but bears repeating that the police, the style of their presentation was to perform as paid security for racist and fascist invaders from Washington. When we stood on NATO, Barbara and I had some signs. We were kind of infiltrating Joey Gibson's team. The police had their backs to us the entire time because all that those I don't want to uniformly condemn every officer that was there, but it appeared that somebody had given them an order to stand there and face off with the citizens of Portland and yell at them if they stepped off the sidewalk. There was a disgusting, hypocritical disparity in the enforcement. When protesters, citizens of Portland, were lined up on the western sidewalk of NATO, cops basically went apeshit and freaked out. At least it seemed like that until later on when they just started to shoot people. And when I say shoot people, obviously not a 9mm or a sidearm was discharged, but we had an officer-involved shooting. A firearm lodged a projectile in the skull of a citizen of Portland. And I hope that OIS report that comes out will include that. Officer-involved shooting, that's what it was. There's actually 3 of them. If you read publications like The Guardian, a major newspaper out of Manchester, England, all over the international media, there are pictures of people from Portland with burns and injuries on their arms, at least 2, one woman, one man. And then we have another situation that was mentioned, a woman complying with the lawful orders of the police, and some scumbag cop wants to grab her sign and knock her to the ground. That's what happened. Ms. Reeves will deal with it. Hopefully there'll be a tort action, and we can throw some, we have $1 million officer. I don't know how much of that has happened under Ms. Reeves' watch. Hopefully we're seeing a situation where expenditures on lawsuits involving the police can be reined in and brought under control, not just as expenditures, but less incidents where that has to happen. But as Bradley mentioned here, the police demeanor was hostile to the citizens of Portland and embracing and protective of people wearing shirts that say, if we don't like you, we'll throw you out of a fucking helicopter. That's what a shirt that says Pinochet did nothing wrong means. That means fascists that don't like an opinion of somebody who's not a fascist will put them in a helicopter and throw them out to their death. And you, I like the expression on your face, not necessarily thrilled. I mean, everybody needs to be protected from violence. We shouldn't escalate. Bad words shouldn't result in physical injury. But there's a serious problem with the way that went down. There's some good side. You know, when we were on the part of NATO north of the Hawthorne Bridge, no bad things happened. I didn't hear any flashbangs detonate until people were down around the Marriott. I didn't get down there in time to see the reporter from the Oregonian bleeding from his skull on the little grassy knoll in front of Umpqua Bank. But as Mr. Handelman and others know, there have been various times when we've re-engaged about the level of, for lack of a better term, crowd control and riot policing. And there needs to be some serious engagement about what went wrong. It's a fine line because it's almost impossible to imagine that there's not going to be a tort action. So the city needs to minimize its liability to protect us taxpayers. But we also need to prevent people from getting shot in the head again. So I hope that I hope that Chief Outlaw will come up with a different title than the deputy chief for you. Because when we deal with the sheriff's department and have this new chain of command and we say deputy chief, I think, which is your official title, I just would like something better. I know there's other assistant chiefs, but. And then the incident of the discussion on the Lars Larson show, I should have personally taken it up more with the mayor this morning. But I think somewhere in the city, and maybe, I don't know if the police have ever done polling, but I think that there was a significant setback in police community relations with what happened. I think the gentleman who was hit in the head is named Anthony, Bradley's friend. And I haven't really seen, I've seen sort of a hiding behind oh, there's an ongoing investigation, instead of, I'm sorry that somebody got shot in the head. All right. So.
I just wanted to say there are quite a few people who I've heard. Is it not on?
It should just come on. Just put it closer.
Okay. I just wanted to say that there are a number of people who I've heard share personal observations, and I would really urge anyone who has who was at August 4th or at any other time and who's observed concerns with police behavior to contact IPR, because they are doing the investigation and they do need to hear from folks who have information. And so anybody who was at the August 4th protest and who feels that they observed something that they think is improper behavior, please contact IPR so that information can be considered in their investigation. So Independent Police Review is on portlandoregon.gov. If you click on, we're updating the website and it's not great right now. But if you go to portlandoregon.gov and you click on, it'll have some place to look for elected officials. Click on the auditor, and under the auditor will be Independent Police Review. Or if you just get to portlandoregon.gov and type IPR into the search function, you'll find it.
And anytime you want to connect with anytime you want to connect with anything in the city, you can dial 823-4000, and that is the information referral function, so they can direct you if you're more a phone person kind of person.
And to quickly add, the mayor's office, if you have a complaint, you are more than welcome. We encourage you to email any staffer. My name is Nicole Grant, nicole.grant@portlandoregon.gov. We are obligated to forward complaints to IPR. So there are kind of different avenues for you available.
So we've got about 15 minutes left. Oh, hello. We've got about 15 minutes left. And what I think I saw, Calais, did you want to say something? I couldn't tell if your hand was up. Okay, so Calais queued first, then I saw Megan, then I saw Philip, then I saw Pat, then I couldn't keep track. So we're going to go with Calais next.
Thank you. I'm Calais. If this is for the city attorney, if Bradley's friend files a tort, will Internal Affairs conduct the investigation, or will the city attorney depend on independent police review?
So if there's a complaint filed with IPR about the police misconduct, IPR will conduct that investigation. There's a separate avenue if Bradley's friend wishes to sue the city. There's a requirement, maybe applicable, maybe not, to give a tort claim notice. Under some federal claims, wouldn't have to give a tort claim notice. And I'm sure Bradley's friend should consult an attorney if they want more information about that. If a tort claim notice is filed or if a lawsuit is filed, that does not go to IPR. That goes to either risk management or my office to handle.
So Meg.
Thank you. I just wanted to very quickly say that I'd like it to be very plain that Chief Outlaw lied in her press conference. And when the chief of police lies to the community about something that everyone knows about and knows something to be different about, it's very difficult to go forward. And I just wanted to echo the idea of restorative justice and say that it's absolutely necessary that Chief Outlaw explain exactly which of these things were lies and why she did. And I think that would go a long way toward restoration. Thank you.
Hello, this is Philip Wolf again. I would like to throw something out for you to bring home to chew on. I did go through the IPR process to file a complaint, and I encourage anyone who plans to sue the city to start with filing a complaint first, because by filing that complaint first, it helps develop your case. So you build more case, you get an investigation, they can find misconduct additionally in that case, and then you can attach that to your suit of the city. So if you do want to go that route, it helps to have some additional information. I've seen a lot of anger tonight, and I definitely understand that anger. I encourage all of you to think about other approaches, how we can build solutions, and what we saw happen at the protests. I think it's important that the mayor and the chief of police and all of the police department really hears from the community what they want to see happen. Get their feedback, their input. And it's important for us to be able to debrief tonight and talk about it. And I don't want to dismiss anyone's feelings, but I do think that if we want to address this, we need constructive ideas, we need solutions, we need recommendations, and we need to see change happen next time. I think that we need to promote, lead, and change in the right directions that we want to see. So I hope that you'll share your ideas for the future and thoughts about what you want to happen and what you want to see happen next time. Thank you.
Okay, so Pat, then Dan.
You are getting your exercise. So Pat Adams again, and I find myself in a little bit difficult situation. I became a peacekeeper during Occupy Portland, and our job even today of the Portland Peace Team is we go out to actually keep peace at demonstrations. And so I actually kind of find myself echoing some of the things or responding to some of the things you're talking about with the Portland police. My experience is when I'm at the Gay Pride Parade, I do not face the radical alt Christians who are screaming, because he's already talked to me and he said, you know what, we're not going to do anything. I got these guys under control, and we're not going to start anything. And I know it, and he's true. But what he's going to do is he's going to provoke the people on the other side. That's his mission. And if he can provoke those other side to come and fight, then that whole day is not about the Gay Pride Parade. Right? It's not about Pride Parade, it's about the fight. And that's their objective. And they're very clear about that, and they're very controlled. So when we go there, we don't face those guys, because they're they're not the threat of violence. They're already under control. We face the parade goers who hear this terrible stuff and respond and get so escalated. And so we stand in the middle and we say, it's okay. These guys are not the show. Remember, that parade is the show. So don't let yourself be sucked in by these guys over here. And so often, and again, when we were at the immigrant at the airport, same thing, right? We weren't facing and trying to de-escalate the racists, because they already knew what they were there for. They weren't going to get escalated. We had to calm the other people down so that they didn't fight these guys and end up with the police coming in. So there is a strategic reason, in my experience, why when we go out to de-escalate and keep the peace, we oftentimes end up facing the people with whom we agree. Because our job is to keep the peace and to make everyone safe. And I mean everyone safe. So what I'm going to recommend to anybody who goes to any of these protests, I have 4 rules. And the first one is no violence. And if you are going to go to an event where the organizers have not committed to nonviolence, you're in trouble. Because what they're going to tell you is, oh, you know what? We agree with a diversity of tactics. That translates to violence. That's what that translates to. And they love having you out there because you provide the cover. All right? I've been to May Day planning sessions where you got to go to nonviolence. They say no. And in fact, they encourage all y'all to wear black. They say it'll make you safe. It'll make them safe because they can do their violence and get away. But the intent, and you saw them, all you got to do is look, their intent is violence. And they wait, usually to the end, and then they start doing it. If you've ever been to a May Day, back then, that was exactly the tactic. So, number one, if you're going to go on a protest or a counter-protest, make sure that it's nonviolent exclusively, right? And that they reject any violence, all right? The second one is make sure that they have a police liaison, all right? Oftentimes, these guys will not have a police liaison because they say the police are fascists. But you make sure that your organizers have a police liaison and you set up and you tell the police, you're safe here, all right? You're safe with us. We're not going to hurt you, and your safety is as important to us as our own. And believe me, as my training is, unless everybody's safe, nobody's safe, all right? And the last thing is, you know, these Proud Boys, they are not their opinions. They are just people. And opinions change, and they change. And to loop them in and call them racist and fascist and get all revved up, that's hate. So I'm going to encourage you to not lump all these guys together, call them fascists, and hate them. Those are my recommendations for when you go out into the streets again. Thanks, Pat Adams.
Okay, so we've got about 5 more minutes left. I'm going to, Dan has raised his hand, and then I have one person who hasn't spoken yet tonight. Dan, how do you feel about letting me pass the mic to her first?
This is for Nicole. When you finally get PSEP seated and you start scheduling public hearings, are you going to issue guidelines on questions and opinions that will be allowed and questions and opinions that will not be allowed?
Can you clarify?
I'm thinking of Mr. Peak, whom I don't know.
Mr. who?
Mr. Peak, the man who was thrown out earlier.
Okay.
He too is a member of the Portland community.
Absolutely agree with you. No, you know, we expect PCCEP members to be collaborative, respectful of others, to be open-minded, consider all viewpoints and opinions. And we expect that of the public as well, right? So no name calling. You know, we recognize that a lot of these issues are emotionally charged. But I also want to remind everyone that we'll have high school aged youth on the committee as well. And so maintaining decorum does not mean you don't share your opinion. It does not mean that you're not honest. It does not mean that you're not emotional, right? But we just need to respect one another, and that's really the bottom line. But as far as policing, you know, opinions, no. We absolutely support the ability of, you know, Portlanders to share their viewpoints with committee members, and also for committee members to share their viewpoints, whatever they are, with each other.
Hi. So, well, first of all, I just want to say that if any member of Portland Cop Watch is down to observe police behavior and turns their back on the police, they're not going to be a member of Portland Cop Watch anymore after that. The IPR investigation we're talking about, I'm hearing two different things. One is that it's an investigation generally of the tactics that were used, and the other is that they might also do an individual investigations of misconduct, specific incidents. I think that the city attorney left out a little piece of the puzzle that if a tort claim is filed and there's a substantial claim of misconduct, that an internal affairs or IPR investigation is supposed to be opened up based on that. That's been under city code for quite a while. And as far as I know, I believe Deputy Chief Day should have business cards, and IPR's phone number should be on there, but I'm 90% sure, because I've known this for a long time, that their number is 503-823-0146. But you should check me on that. But I think that those kinds of pieces of information should be available at these forums. I think the IPR should have been invited to this forum regardless of whether they were the main speaker or not. And I'm hoping that we get an explanation about what's going to happen in the future, since once the PCCEP is seated, in theory, these forums don't exist anymore. So can you explain to us about your plans for the future?
So the plan right now, the expectation is that the first official PCCEP meeting will be in late October, date not chosen yet, but that's the current timeline. Yes, these forums kind of were implemented to kind of take the place of the PCCEP until we got it up and running. So we're obviously kind of approaching that time. You know, if you all think, and just let me know or let the mayor know, outside of those meetings, if you think this is a helpful forum, if you think it's of value, we can keep these going as well. There's nothing, you know, the mayor hasn't said, okay, you know, we'll scrap these once the committee's up and running. If there is a demand for it and you think that this is useful and helpful, we can absolutely put resources into continuing these meetings. And they'll just have to, the PCEP plan, the PCCE plan currently does not contemplate kind of running community forums alongside, you know, their own meetings. So I think we'll have to have conversations with the facilitators to the extent that this kind of event is connected to the work of the PCCEP going forward. It could be, it doesn't have to be. I think that's just an ongoing conversation that I'm happy to have. And it is 8:30. If anyone, well, first of all, thank you all very much for your time this evening and just the questions and conversation. I mean, I know that there is a lot of anger and there is a lot of concern within the community, and so, you know, please consider me a resource to the extent that I can be one. I've been attending these since about February or January, for a while now, and they've been quite like eye-opening. Yeah, so thank you. And Judith, you want to close out?
Yeah, I wanted to let people know, and Mulugeta Sarau was mentioned, and this November 13th will be the 30th anniversary of his murder by white racist skinheads at Southeast 31st and Pine. And the Urban League, our Office of Equity and Human Rights, is working with the Urban League, and we're going to have commemorative events and a half-day conference and a lot of stuff to look at that. So I just had to throw out, keep your eyes open for that. It is a really important place to stop and take reflection. So we'll be getting more information out. Thanks.
If anyone has any additional questions that I can be of specific help with, feel free to approach me after the meeting. I'd like to touch base with you. If not, have a good night, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.